have managed to bring together, I'm glad to say, under one roof, which is called our Business Engagement Board, some key business, all the key business sectors within the region, plus all the representative organisations, so the Chamber of Commerce, the CBI, the Federation of Small Business, have all joined with us now, so that we have an opportunity to have a single joined up voice for the region. Now this is so important, and for those of you that were in the earlier session, it is important that we can talk to the government as a region with a single voice. Otherwise the government will divide and rule, which they are very much used to doing, and it is therefore important that somehow this region talks for a single voice. The local authorities, very encouragingly, are increasingly working closer together and are leading the bid for more devolution of powers for the region and more funding for the region, and we are supporting that activity. I'm not going to go into the detail of the current climate change emergency because clearly that is for others, but I am going to just perhaps point out some of the reasons why this region is so important and why the world actually is looking at this region and should be looking at this region, because we are a small but perfect representation of the climate change problem. We have highly intensive carbon emitting industries, all vital to a thriving economy, but we account for over 5% of the UK's entire carbon emissions in this area. We're on a coastal tidal estuary with high flood risk, with a rural agricultural community dependent on a stable climate. We have high levels of deprivation, both in rural and our urban areas. And to top it off, we have experienced decades of underinvestment, especially in transport, but other infrastructure as well. So we are a significant example of what a perfect storm could look like if we fail to achieve net zero. And the film that was on earlier, many of you will have seen, I think demonstrated what could happen if we don't do what we should do. But unlike the government perfect storms that they're talking about around lorry drivers and GPs and supply chain, we in this region have the solutions, and those fall into a number of categories. We've got all the energy sources, the new greener energy sources, offshore wind, hydrogen, biofuels, battery technologies. And there was an announcement last week that some of you may have seen around the potential nuclear fusion energy plant at Goole. So that adds to the mix of solutions that we can provide in this region. We're already leading a number of carbon initiatives, as you heard earlier in the Marketing Humber event. As the largest regional cluster of emitters, we're already at the forefront of reducing carbon in our larger businesses and have a number of government projects that are being supported by the private sector as well as the public sector. So a significant reduction in carbon in this region actually makes a huge difference to UK PLC. And we're leading the way in carbon capture and storage. Clearly, being on the North Sea coast, we have the best access to undersea storage and all the service facilities and infrastructure associated with fossil fuel activity in the North Sea to do it quickly and efficiently. The first pipeline project is already underway, and once this is completed, then clearly this can be extended to the rest of Yorkshire and the North and Midlands. But today is not about business, as you heard earlier. There were some concerns, quite rightly, in the audience about what does an ordinary business do, a small business do, an individual do about this agenda, and how do they get involved. So that's what this event is all about. 99% of the region's businesses are SMEs, so it's vital that they get involved. So today is about educating and inspiring the younger generation as well. And there are a number of events going on across the road at the Ferrens Art Gallery for school children, and that has to be a good thing for the future. So what do we want to achieve this event? Firstly, we want to raise awareness about COP26 and all the programmes that you hear about on the media. And what part is the LEP playing in this? Secondly, we want to challenge conventional thinking and garner support for the road to net zero in this region. So this includes, and you heard a lot of this in the earlier session, and I wrote this before I heard the earlier session, I have to say. Research, it covers agriculture, it covers recycling, it covers plastics, upskilling our workforce to greener technologies, utilising our natural assets that you heard about, and importantly, innovation in everything green. Thirdly, we want to inspire the public sector organisations and private sector organisations and communities in general to play their part, if not for themselves, but for their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even great-great-grandchildren. And finally, we want to keep the conversation going. One of the big concerns that I have, that once all this hype is over with COP26, everything goes dead, and we all go back to our previous ways and nothing happens, and governments stop supporting. We can't allow that to happen. So what are we doing as a LEP? We're leading the Humber Industrial Cluster Plan, which is working alongside big business, 2 or 3 of the businesses you heard earlier today, and working with Catch, which is the leading representative of the industry in the region as well. We're partners in the North East Yorkshire Energy Hub, which is working with communities on things like practical things like energy efficient housing, retrofit of housing, strategy for EV charging points, which I think will become a big issue for us all shortly. The Growth Hub, which has organised this event alongside many others, is already providing guidance and advice on how to manage your emissions, where to go for support in reducing carbon, and what else you need to do to be carbon free in your business. The University of Hull are great partners of ours, and the Aura Centre, the Flood Innovation Centre, and the Centre for Sustainable Technologies, I don't know who thought that title up, are all world leaders, and we should be very proud of all of those and more in this region. And there is funding available through Spark Fund and various others as well. So there's a lot going on, but there's still plenty to do. The local authorities and the 2 LEPs across the whole of the Humber are planning to bring a lot of these activities together under an umbrella structure, because it is absolutely vital, because it's a huge complex jigsaw, all of this activity, that we bring all of this together so we talk as one voice for the Humber and especially for the Hay geography north of the estuary. So I'd just like to finish with a message to the Prime Minister, and I hope the press are here, because I don't mind being quoted. If the Prime Minister, and you saw him on the film, if he's serious about the 3 post-Brexit economic and social goals for this UK, then please start taking the Humber seriously. If you want to start making inroads into these goals, rather than just talking about them, then where else would you be able to level up, promote and facilitate global Britain, and score some early net zero wins, all at the same time and in the same place? The Humber, and there are lots of photographs being shown of all the facilities and activities we've got. So the Prime Minister needs to put aside political decision making and invest where he will get the most value for money and at scale. The Chancellor only yesterday said that the cost of the net zero agenda was going to be high. Therefore, it would make sense to go for the low-hanging fruit, not the scattergun approach currently being adopted as political compromise. It's not rocket science when you think about it. As those of you in business will know, if you want to expand your sales, i.e. new green energy sources, you start with the best product, the most competitive product. If you want to reduce costs, i.e. reduce carbon emissions, you start with the highest element of cost in your business. We are historically underinvested in this region, especially in our coastal and rural areas. We have the best free port bid, and we've got one of the largest UK port facilities. And we've got the opportunity to make the biggest cuts in carbon emissions because we emit the most in this region. Not only that, but we're also going to produce more clean energy than anywhere else in the country. So we tick all the boxes. We tick more than all the boxes, frankly. So it's the start of a 15, 20-year journey. The government needs to start somewhere, and I would hope that it's going to start here in the Humber. So to use a Formula One analogy, and I'm a great supporter of Formula One, the Humber is in the pole position. All we're waiting for now is the lights to go green. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Some really great aims and initiatives of LEPs, and LEPs all around the country are doing some amazing things to drive this agenda forward, and I'm particularly interested into understanding what comes after COP, which we're all busily focused on, but I think now it's time to think about the decade of action as we in the UN are coining. So hopefully you've all seen a big bright blue bus outside. That is 100% fully electric, one of the only EV coaches in the country. There's a few different fleets of buses now being used in this region and other parts in the northwest and stuff like that, which is really cool. And also they're looking at hydrogen and things like that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the tour is, what net zero is, what the difference is between that and carbon neutrality, and try and demystify all of these, phrases that are coming out now, because it can be quite confusing, and some of these phrases have been concocted by big corporates, communications teams to make them sound as amazing as possible, when really it's just a phrase that they've made up and then put their own definition to it. So we need a bit of consistency to know what we're all working towards, and we all need targets, and most importantly, we all need to start acting. And really focus on the business case for this thing as well, if you're a business, because this thing is an amazing opportunity to differentiate, which I'll talk to you a little bit about in a minute. But I just also thought I'd just mention, last night I was flicking through in the hotel after dinner, flicking through the channels, and you don't watch loads of TV, but there's this thing, I don't know if anyone saw it, I think it was called Celebrity Trash Monsters, and it was this amazing concept hosted by John Richardson, a very dry comedian, in which three celebrities, I think, who was it? John Barnes, and a couple of others, Jodie Marsh and someone else, some other celebrity, and what they had to do was wear these jackets with bags on, which was all, and within the bags they had to put all of the rubbish they were generating over the course of a few weeks. They had targets in place to reduce the amount of rubbish they were generating within their households, and they were measuring the carbon associated with that with the waste that they were generating, using some clever carbon calculations. And I thought it was something really different that I'd never seen on TV before, where they were trying to explain what a carbon footprint was and what net zero is, and I think it was an example of the amount of awareness now that we have in society on these issues that we didn't have a few years ago, right? And I always say 2019 was a bit of a pivotal year, with Extinction Rebellion, forever divisive they are, the Greta Thunberg effect, the school strike for climate, and this really shone a spotlight on the climate crisis, and really, I think, started this this action that we are seeing now, and it's important to recognise that we've come a long way, but we have an awful long way to go. So I just thought I'd highlight that as a bit of a fun thing that I was watching last night. I was like, this is different. John Barnes won, by the way. He reduced the most carbon. So the tour is this what coined the Carbon Battle Bus. We kicked off at the Eden Project here, which is our founding charitable partner, back at the beginning of June, in line with the G7 event down there, to try and highlight and get world leaders engaged with what we need to do around it. And we're now in week 8. We've been zigzagging our way through the country. We have over 33 official stops in partnership with some local authorities, and it's been amazingly heartening to see some of the action taking place at a local level, and we need local action to solve this global problem. So, you know, it's really, really cool. The Planet Mark. So I get all these weird and wonderful questions about who the Planet Mark are. We're not a bus company, we're not an events company, we're actually a sustainability certification scheme. And what we do 3 things, right? We help measure and independently verify organisations' carbon footprints really, really well, set them annual targets in order to reduce. In order to keep the Planet Mark and be able to use it on your websites and marketing collateral, you need to be reducing your carbon on an annual basis, otherwise we're going to take it away from you, because we want it to be a true symbol of progress. And then we're a little bit different in the sense that we really focus on the business case for sustainability and carbon reductions, because we know that people want to work for and with businesses that are doing more good. So we're trying to maximise the benefit of, you know, looking at, you know, perhaps the upfront costs of making these reductions by helping you effectively win and retain business, making your customers sticky. And we're seeing some large organisations stipulating with their suppliers that they have to be setting net zero targets now, have to be setting science-based targets, and have to be showing tangible reductions in their carbon footprint. So, you know, why not treat this as an opportunity and be proactive as opposed to reactive to your big customers and also the legislation that's coming through now. And then we help, you know, engage staff on the journey and help bring their passions from outside of the workplace and bring them in, you know, form these sustainability champions teams and put a robust set of plans in place to reduce, and then simultaneously help those companies communicate their sustainability achievements in a way that when you scratch beneath the surface of companies, there's an awful lot of good things going on, right? Whether from a social perspective, charity events, employee action days, all of this good stuff that is just a natural fabric of a business, as well as environmental issues. So we're trying to wrap our arms around all these things and then help communicate it in like sound bites and ways that will resonate and don't get lost, and maximise the impact of those activities taking place. So yeah, that's us, and yeah, we're helping hundreds and hundreds of organisations in the UK and around the world. So the tour itself, 3 main purposes, right? It's good to have things in 3. So 1 is to raise awareness of COP26 itself, the UN-backed Race to Zero campaign, and the government campaign or initiative Together for Our Planet, all of which I'll be talking about in a minute. The other thing is we're collecting carbon stories. So we have some amazing speakers today talking about what they're doing within their own organisations and initiatives. But also, if anyone else here today wants to share things that they're doing within their own organisations, George there with the camera in the green t-shirt will be collecting and interviewing, and there's a lovely French man called Antoine knocking about somewhere with a camera who's also collecting carbon stories, which we're going to feed up to COP and create this amazing montage. So it's a great way to showcase what you're doing. And then finally, we want to encourage organisations to set these targets, right? The government loves targets, but it's important to set them and then start to put plans in place in order to reach those targets. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do that and achieve that. And then on the right you can see, you know, our lovely, the British Isles. All those numbers represent Planet Mark certified businesses around the country, and you can see the flag down in Cornwall. Like, it's a really badly designed map, so you actually want to see the route, but we've actually gone all the way out to the east, Suffolk and Ipswich, and then zigzagged our way back all the way up the country. Tonight we're heading up to Middlesbrough, then we're in Newcastle, and then on Saturday we're ending at Ingram Valley Farm, which is an amazing farm in Northumberland, which is really studying regenerative agriculture and creating a place where organisations and local communities can come and get out into nature and connect better with nature. The stuff they're doing there is incredible, so I'm really looking forward to that. I don't think I've packed appropriately, so I'm hoping they're going to lend me some farm-based attire. So these 6 organisations are linked to what I just talked about. So if I talk through all of them one by one, so we've got the UN-backed Race to Zero campaign, and that is aiming to gather as many net zero pledges as possible present back at COP and actually beyond that. And Planet Mark is one of the partners of Race to Zero, and you can make a net zero pledge as an organisation and unlock some amazing marketing collateral around making that pledge. And then they want to see, you know, plans and progress going forward on an annual basis, which is the aim of the game. Together for Our Planet is the government-linked Race to Zero initiative, which is again trying to raise as much awareness as possible, building up to COP in a couple of weeks' time. Then we have Carbon Copy, which is a website where you can go and submit your carbon story to, which the organisers of COP and the UN-backed Race to Zero are collecting all of these stories so we can inspire others, right? Because it is, you know, there was a question from a gentleman earlier about how complicated it is to measure carbon and stuff like that. It's not that complicated, right? And this is what we're going to talk about today. So it is really easy, but we want to try and highlight these stories to try and inspire others to do the same thing. And then we have a couple of other partners, and also Bays, Together for Our Planet. We wouldn't be here without them. They've helped facilitate and support us on the road, so we really appreciate their help. Then we've got the Institute of Directors, Prologis and Roadchef. Roadchef has been putting us up around the country. They're a certified organisation that help measuring their carbon and reducing every year. Prologis are the biggest builder of logistics parks, so big sheds in the UK and around the world. They've been cutting their carbon every year. They're helping support the tour. And then the Institute of Directors, who have an incredible platform of thousands of directors around the country, and they're taking the net zero and carbon agenda really, really seriously. And we're hosting our awards there next month, and again, without them, none of this would be taking place. So special thanks to all of those organisations. Right, so now on to our next slide. So phones out. We're going to be here until 38, where submissions have taken place. So what have we heard of here? So, you know, I'm always hoping that we get 100% on all of them, because I've just talked about all three. But, you know, inevitably that doesn't take place. So who has heard of these three organisations or initiatives? Right, 100% on COP, which is great. Nearly 100%, and you know, obviously I didn't talk well enough about Together for Our Planet, only less than half of us were listening, and it's easily to get distracted with our phones these days and emails and all that good stuff. You know, I'm guilty of that half the time. But you will come a cropper in the quiz in a little bit. All right, 34, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. So, 100% have heard of COP. Nearly 100% Race to Zero, and 40% Together for Our Planet, which is actually higher than it has been previously, so I'm grateful, thank you. Right, COP. So, who knows what COP actually stands for? COP. Anyone want to volunteer? Conference of Parties, thank you very much. Yes, so Conference of Parties. And as you might well guess by the number, COP has taken place 26 times over the last 26 years. Who knows where COP25 was hosted? This will be good. This will be a gold star moment for anyone. It was actually hosted in Madrid last year. And COP26 is significant because, like COP 21, which was in Paris, where the Paris Accord was formed, every 5 years are the big ones, where significant decisions get made and the agenda gets moved forward. Now, this is the biggest and most significant one because the time in which we have to solve this challenge, the window is increasingly shrinking. Our climate destiny is still very much in our hands, but we need more action and more commitment to take place. So at Paris, governments were tasked with going away and putting their commitments in place, coming up with agendas of how they're going to reach net zero and make those things. And if all those commitments were combined and acted upon, we still wouldn't get to 2 degrees or well below 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees C warming. So we need more, and we need more radical action. But, you know, no matter what takes place at COP, we've got to keep moving forward, and we've got to inspire change, and we have to lead from the front, because other countries, we're further ahead. To put that into context, right, I was on this climate change task force meeting the other day with some big companies and some MPs, and they were saying that the UN-backed Race to Zero campaign was aiming for 100,000 pledges from SMEs and larger companies around the UK to reach net zero. Now, at the time, this was a couple of weeks back, I think they were just over 10,000, so hopefully they've reached a few more in the UK. But the next most pledges made in a country was the US, and that was on 500, right? So we got a long way to go, and I love learning about different countries around the world and where they are at with the climate agenda and things like that. So we have to demonstrate this is an opportunity and lead, and we're going to be hearing some amazing stories about how to do that. So that's COP26, really, really significant, and we'll be there, and we're gathering these stories here. So you're part of this. By being here, you're part of COP26 already. And then the UK government's own initiative to highlight COP and things like that is the Together for Our Planet campaign. And then we have the UN-backed Race to Zero. So it's really simple. So you make a pledge, you want to get to net zero by 2050. We have to by law anyway. Every organisation in the UK has to. It's a very cool piece of legislation. It's the first piece of legislation around the world of its kind. And also you want to halve your emissions by 2030 for Scope 1 and Scope 2, which I'll talk about in a second. Get a plan in place to reduce, get on with it, talk about it, publish it. That's the aim of the game. And that's what it's all about. Now, so I did geography at university, and I really enjoyed learning about all of this good stuff. So for those that don't know, and some of you, this might be, you might be super informed on this, but when we talk about carbon, we talk about these different scopes of carbon, Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. And there's a couple of different frameworks in which you can measure your carbon footprint against. With the most widely used framework is called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And what the Greenhouse Gas Protocol stipulates, if you want to measure your carbon footprint as an organisation, as a minimum, you must measure what we call your Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, which is your direct, Scope 1 is your direct fuel consumption. So that's gas you use to heat and cool your buildings. And then that is fuel that you're putting into company-owned or leased vehicles. That we have to measure, and you have a relative operational control over that in order to reduce it. And then Scope 2, on the whole, is electricity consumption, in which you're kind of semi-beholden to the grid, but I'll talk about different ways in which you can procure renewable energy tariffs and stuff like that. It's also steam is a very small one if you're in industry that are around that, because some people have highlighted that to me. So yeah, so it's electricity consumption and steam for Scope 2. And then Scope 3 is everything else. So every action or activity that takes place inevitably has a carbon emission associated with it. And we break it down into upstream and downstream Scope 3. There are some things that are relatively easy to measure where the data is readily available. So it's all about how easily can we measure and quantify these things and use actual data and move away from estimates. So easy to measure Scope 3 things are things like, relatively easy I should say, business travel, waste, both recycled and general waste, and they have different emission factors associated with it. Water, commuting, those are the relatively easy ones. When we talk about Scope 3, it's really interesting. It's a very, very popular point at the moment. It's what I call the frontier of carbon footprinting. It's quite tricky, and the trickiest one at the moment, I think, for most organisations, so everyone's got a supply chain, right, is Scope 3 Category 1, which is purchased goods and services. So that's everything that you purchase, from your marketing support to your stationery to everything that you need to run your business. Now, most companies, what have we got? 50 to 100 suppliers. Understanding the carbon footprint of those suppliers and the activities associated with how they're interacting with you is really, really tricky. And there are some amazing databases out there now in order to do that, but increasingly so, companies are engaging directly with their suppliers, their tier 1 suppliers, and then beyond, to understand and get hold of as much accurate data as possible, which is where we're at now, right? We live in a globalized world, and we're busily catching up and trying to quantify the impacts of that globalization. It's really interesting. That is the trickiest bit, but we always say, start where you do have readily available data, and that typically sits in your finance department, right? It's your energy bills, it's your expense claims from employees doing business travel using their own vehicles and stuff like that. It's your fleet data, your fuel cards. It's things that is available, and the government, DEFRA, every year produces conversion factors because the carbon emissions change every year in terms of carbon associated, and so you'd use those conversion factors to change your fuel consumption into a carbon CO2 equivalent, we call it, which is the consistent metric where all of these gases at the top there, they're all greenhouse gases, and they all have different warming impacts, but for consistency, we all convert it into carbon dioxide. Right, I probably wanged on to that slide a little bit too long, so let's move on. But that is really important. And this, for those who haven't seen it, is an organisational carbon footprint, right? So here, over a year period, right? So we've got November 19 to October 20. How many sites are the boundary, the scope of their footprint we're looking at? So we're looking at 45 sites. What was measured? And we've also got an estimate for home working there, because, you know, life's a little bit different now. A lot of us have been working from home. What the overall absolute carbon footprint is for this company, which is 1,000 tonnes. You can break it down per employee to give employees a little bit of ownership over their own personal carbon footprints, 0.5 tonnes. What their target is to reduce by, which is 5%. And then data quality score, because some of it, you know, is less accurate than others. And then round there, we can see a really visual pie chart of what that company's carbon footprint is. And the blue bit is natural gas. So gas and electricity are by far the most significant aspects of this company's footprint. And by seeing it in a visual way, we know where to focus our efforts, which are going to do the most good and reduce in the quickest amount of time. And it's also something you can play back into your organisation externally to demonstrate you know where your carbon is coming from, where your carbon is being emitted. And it's pretty cool because this other chart here, which is from a Planet Mark report, it's really important to make carbon as accessible as possible for everyone, even if, you know, and no matter how carbon literate you are, because people are really passionate about doing stuff to try and solve the climate crisis and play an active role in it. Because, you know, I get climate anxiety. I think people the more aware you are of the impacts and the issues and what's coming up in the future, you know, the more worried you get. So the more, I'm very lucky, like my job, I'm actively involved in this space, which is helping me address my climate anxieties. But for a lot of people, you know, they don't. So allowing staff to play an active role and playing this back into them, so you can start to say, right, I still don't know what does 1,000 tonnes really mean, but if you say, well, that's equivalent to 971 flights, return flights from London to New York, you can start to, in your head a little bit, understand, all right, I kind of know what that means and where that sits. And we've done the same for these kind of 6 categories along here to say what that equivalent to, and it becomes a lot more accessible for people to understand and then start to take action in order to reduce. So that's a carbon footprint. Now, net zero, the definition of net zero. Net zero is actually, you know, it's been around for a little bit, but it's only really in the last couple of years it's really risen to the forefront of the climate, you know, what we're going to do about the climate crisis and where we all need to be aiming for. So this is going to lean on what I talked about earlier around Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3. So the Science Based Targets Initiative have actually just concluded their consultation on a set definition for net zero, because there's no internationally agreed definition of what net zero is, which is really dangerous because companies can then interpret it, well, not anyone can interpret it how they want in a way. So what is going to be settled on is this pretty much, which is getting your direct fuel consumption and electricity scope 1 and 2 to absolute zero. So that has to be run on zero emissions. I'm going to talk about how we do that in a sec. And then scope 3, we want to measure all of it. There's 15 categories, it's pretty chunky. And then we want to get that as close to zero as we possibly can, about 90%. It's going to be hard, but it's got to be done. And then for that last 10%, what we call the residual emissions, we are saying you can offset that through carbon removal offset schemes, which again I'll talk about in a minute. So that's what makes it that's what means the net zero part of zero carbon, right? So there's always going to be a little bit of residual emissions when we reach net zero that we can't offset, that we can't reduce to zero, sorry, that we're going to have to offset. So these are examples along here, this jazzy animation, to show what you need to do in order to get to net zero, right, across these different scopes. So scope 1 and 2, Electricity, there are some amazing deals out there. So the cost of brown energy compared to green now is just as competitive, right? So there's some amazing companies out there. If you want to get on a renewable energy tariff, or if your organisation is of a size, you can purchase these things called power purchase agreements, where you can form a direct relationship with the electricity generator. So you want to purchase renewable energy, you've got to transition your fleet to EV or hydrogen powered, but hydrogen, there's some infrastructure issues around transport itself, and then energy efficiency measures. Scope 3, supplier engagement, waste reduction practice, travel hierarchies, which again I can send everyone more information on the travel hierarchy piece. And then offsetting, I'm going to talk about in a second, but there's two different types of carbon removal offsets, which is natural carbon sinks and carbon capture and storage technology. Alright, so now we've got some dreamy looking graphs with, again, some lovely animation going on here. So the black line represents true zero, and this is kind of the trajectory that we need to be on, that most companies are going to be on as well. So there's lots of low-hanging fruit in order to radically reduce our carbon footprints over the next 5 years. And then it starts to peter off a little bit because it gets really, really hard as we get to actual net zero. And then that 10% you can see in there, there's always going to be that within our supply chains and things like that, within the next 10 years anyway. And that's that 10% that we will look to offset. So those are the requirements. And no, there was some, I thought there was, maybe there's another graph. So, right, carbon offset. So offsetting, right, bit of a cowboy industry. The demand for offsets has doubled in the last year, which is amazing. Organisations, especially in the UK, they're very passionate about UK offsetting schemes. So we're seeing lots of organisations buying farms and planting their own forests and stuff like that. It's quite cool. But there's lots of other opportunities out there to purchase really credible offsetting schemes. So if anyone is looking at offsetting, in order to demonstrate credibility of the offsetting schemes that you're looking to procure or work with, is their gold standard, really, really credible offsetting schemes, or VCS, so verified carbon schemes. They're all regulated and audited really, really strongly. And also there's these, you get different vintages of offsets, which is a word I quite like, where some offsets you can purchase are like 20 years old, so those projects are finished. And I question, the usefulness of those carbon credits, and also they're causing the price of carbon credits in the voluntary market to significantly be less. So I always question anything below £5 a tonne. Think about it a little bit, and always look at gold standard VCS offsetting schemes. And then there's two types of carbon offsetting, right? There's carbon avoidance, so there's investing in activities that replace carbon from entering the atmosphere. So things like solar PV projects in developing world countries. Electric cook stoves is a really popular one, so people stop burning paraffin and things like that to cook with, and another type of fuel of which I can't remember. So they're replacement ones, but in order to get to net zero, you need to be investing in carbon removal offsets, so schemes that actively sequester carbon from the atmosphere, because carbon dioxide specifically stays in the atmosphere for about 100 years, we think. Things like methane is about a year, but it's a lot more carbon intensive, so we've got to try and remove as much of that carbon, the 420 parts per million we're going to be hitting for highest in 2.5 million years. We've got to get that out of the atmosphere. So there's natural carbon sinks such as trees. Seagrass is pretty cool, and there's lots of great seagrass projects going around the UK, and peatland restoration. And then technology is carbon capture and storage. I think the largest carbon capture and storage facility is just opened up in Iceland a couple of weeks back, but they can sequester in a year something like, I don't know the actual number, it's something like 10,000, 100,000 tonnes, which is a drop in the ocean compared to the amount we're emitting every year. So the scalability of the technology it's questionable whether it's going to be able to scale in time for us to solve this thing. So we have to be investing, but it's still better than not doing it. So we just got to keep pushing ahead. All right, so this is a question I get asked a lot, right? And this is something that's really interesting because especially local authorities, right? Some of them, they've lots of declared climate emergencies. Some have set net zero targets. Some have set carbon neutral targets. So, and we see lots of companies out there saying, whether, you know, we're carbon neutral now, we want to be carbon neutral by then, or we're net zero, you know, so. And then you've got carbon positive, climate negative, you know, Microsoft are going down some weird and wonderful routes. But I think the two that we're going to be really sticking with is net zero and carbon neutral. So the differences between the two are quite key. So in order to be certified as carbon neutral against this framework called PAS 2060, which is the most readily used framework for certifying organisations as carbon neutral, you have to be doing four things, right? You've got to be measuring your carbon. You've got to be having targets in place to reduce that carbon. You have to have a plan. Targets in place to reduce carbon on an annual basis. You have to have a documented plan in order to reduce it. And then you can offset through gold standard or VCS type schemes. I can't remember if it's I think it doesn't matter if it's avoidance or removal. And if you do that, all those things at one time, you can be certified as carbon neutral, right? So you can essentially offset your entire carbon footprint as long as you've got plans and a target in place. Net zero is different because it's actually actively getting you to significantly reduce your carbon, and you can't, you know, like there might be couple of actual net zero organisations out there, but I would question anyone that is actually net zero now. So those are the key differences, right? So carbon neutral, you can be certified as carbon neutral right now. Net zero is a place we're trying to get to. And then there's carbon negative and climate positive. Typically, carbon negative or especially climate positive, is offsetting at least double the amount of what your carbon footprint is. And all of these activities are great to do, but we must focus on carbon reduction first and foremost. So, you know, you can't just be like, oh yeah, we'll just buy a load of offsets and then we've done our part. You know, that is not the approach that we must take, because we're never going to solve this thing if that's the approach that everyone takes. So we must reduce. And this is kind of the reduction target that we're on to 2050. So the pink line is a straight line. Blue line is 5% reductions every year. And as the gentleman said earlier, right, in the last year, the 2020, we saw about a 7% global average in carbon emissions. And we all know the disruption that had to happen and the closing down that happened just to hit that number. And that has to happen every year, you know. In order to meet our net zero ambitions, and the green line is 12%, which is what Planet Mark certified organisations are achieving at the moment. So, you know, there's a long way to go, but it's events like today and having so many people here to understand and talk about it, which is what's going to get us there. Right, now is the biggest test of who's been listening carefully. There is a prize for whoever gets the most right. To put it into context, no one has got all the questions right. So, you know, I think I didn't write these questions, so I apologise in advance. Okay, so this is the first question, which, yeah, we've got people there. So, everyone should be able to read it, but I'll read it out loud again. So, Carbon Limited, a fictional company, has found that it has 100 tonnes of carbon emissions through their electricity and heating bills. They commit to reducing their electricity consumption each year and buy 100 tonnes of certified offsets, investing in solar farms. What have they done? So what would you call that set of activities? What would you classify that as? All right, so we've got four. So I think 4 represents a good amount of thinking and going on, which is great. These questions are not easy. All right, so that's, you know, we're pretty much there. Let's see what everyone went for, hopefully. Okay, so we got the top answer is invested in carbon removal offsets. We've got 24% net zero commitment. We got a few down there, none of the above. Carbon. Okay, so we got a fairly spread with the highest percentage carbon removal offsets. So the actual answer is gone carbon neutral, right? 22%, so congratulations, those of you who answered that. The reason it's not carbon removal offsets is because solar farms are carbon replacement offsets. So they are replacing activities such as fossil fuel types electricity generation. They're generating that electricity through solar PV. They're not actively sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. They haven't made a net zero commitment. They haven't gone carbon negative or positive. They haven't offset more than what their emissions that they're measuring currently are. So they've gone carbon neutral because they've measured their emissions. They've committed to reducing, and it should say they have a plan in place, and they've got and they bought the offsets to, which is reflective of their 100 tons. So they've gone carbon neutral. All right. So question 2. So I think there's 3 questions. So COP Enterprises has purchased 1,000 tons of certified carbon offsets and has switched to renewable energy, installed LED lighting, and started transitioning its fleet to electric vehicles. Good for them. They encourage their employees to recycle. What have they done? So we'll give a couple of minutes here. Running slightly behind the old schedule, but that'll be all right. So there is a key activity, couple of key activities not taking place as a clue for those who haven't answered yet. Right, we're going to have a look at the answer. Well, what has everyone answered at first? Right, so we got 45% made a net zero commitment, 24% invested in carbon removal offsets, 5% got carbon neutral, 11%. Okay, so the most popular answer is made a net zero commitment. It's actually none of the above, which again, I'm sorry, I didn't write these questions. I can't quite read that, but you know, someone might be still on a winning run. So they haven't made a net zero commitment. You know, there's nothing in there that says we are, committing to reduce our carbon emissions to zero and at least 90 by scope 3. They're not even measuring their carbon footprint. So all they've said is they purchased 1,000 tons. There's nothing there about investing in offsets. I know they have in certified carbon offsets and has switched to renewable, but they haven't said what type of offsets they are. They haven't gone carbon neutral, so we don't know how much their carbon footprint is. Haven't gone carbon positive negative. So, because the key bit here is they haven't actually measured what their footprint is. They've just purchased 1,000 tons. All right, third and final question. So, TFOP Ventures is aiming to reduce its emissions across all 3 scopes by 90% at least by 2030, and will invest in certified tree planting projects for the remaining 10%. What have they done? As a clue, the answer has been a very popular answer in the last 2 questions. All right, yes. Come on. All right, we've still got a few rogue people on the carbon negative positive route, but we welcome that. 3% or none of the above. Right, okay, well 82%, the very, very vast majority, made a net zero commitment. And it is the most challenging out of all of those, so which is an example of that, but yes. So they are aiming to reduce all of their emissions across all their scopes by 90%, right, which is the requirement of scope 3, by 2030, and they're offsetting that residual, that last 10% in tree planting projects, which are carbon removal type schemes. So that is net zero. So now, in theory, and they've invested in carbon removal offsets. So that 9%, we can classify that as a win as well. So George Machin, 2 out of 3, so we're still yet to get a clean sweep. But, you know, got 2 out of 3 and in the quickest time and was the only person to get 2 out of 3 right. So George, you want to give us a wave? Well done, congratulations. You haven't been in any previous events, have you? No. Well done. Excellent stuff. Okay, awesome. So George, I'll speak to you after this. So just a couple of little reminders before we move into our carbon story. So UN Race to Zero, this is the aim of it, right? Pledge, plan, proceed, publish. And you can do that via the Zero Carbon Tour website. Fill out this form as official partners of Race to Zero. Right, if anyone is out eating those delicious sandwiches still, can they now make their way back to sit down for the second Carbon Stories session? That would be amazing. Now I'm going to put this water bottle down here. All right. I absolutely can't see anything at this juncture, so I'm not sure what's going on. But yeah, so we're going to have our second round of Carbon Stories, exactly the same concept as before. We have 4 amazing speakers, all with different stories to tell and different backgrounds, similar to last time. So first, we have Jonathan Oxley, Hull Cluster Plan Manager from Humber Industrial Cluster Plan. If we give him a warm round of applause, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Gosh, I see what you mean about the dazzling here. It's not just the audience, the lights too. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much to Planet Mark and to my LEP colleagues for the invitation to share a little bit with you about the Humber Industrial Cluster Plan. If we could have the... Okay. If we could advance the slides. Thank you. Okay, so the first thing to note, so the Humber Industrial Cluster Plan is a collaborative venture, and it's a public-private partnership. It's funded by the UK government under the UK Research and Innovation team, and it's led by the Hull and East Yorkshire LEP, ably assisted by Catch. We also have 8 private sector partners from across our region, and those are industrial organisations who are active in this space, both in terms of the emissions they produce as a result of their operations, but also sort of active in terms of employing people and manufacturing things in our region. The Humber Industrial Cluster is the largest industrial cluster in the UK. I don't know how many of you know that. It's actually, not only is it the largest, but it's so large, it's actually equivalent to the next 2 clusters added together. That's how significant it is in terms of CO2 emissions. We're talking around about 15 million tonnes a year of CO2, 20 million tonnes a year of CO2 if you include the associated energy production that goes into the industrial production itself. It actually adds about £18 billion to the UK economy. I think you'd all agree that's a non-negligible sum of money. And the Humber Industrial Cluster has actually been cited by the World Economic Forum. For those of you who've heard of the Davos event that usually takes place in January, all the great and the good, supposedly, from the world who get together to discuss how to make things work better. They've been citing this. The World Economic Forum have been citing the Humber Industrial Cluster as one of the 2 most important industrial clusters in the world. The other one actually being an industrial park in China. And you might imagine that the Chinese might have a slightly different take in terms of how they might go about persuading and helping their industry come together and cooperate in terms of getting to net zero. In the UK, of course, I'm very pleased to say, as you probably all know, that we've made some significant headway in terms of reducing our CO2 already. In 2010, we actually had about approximately 500 million tonnes a year of CO2. That's total CO2 emissions for the entirety of the country. We're now down at somewhere like about 325 million tonnes of emissions. So we've gone down by 175 million tonnes a year of CO2. Quite a big reduction, actually. The only thing is, most of that CO2 reduction has been achieved by decarbonising our power supply, aka electricity. So our electricity network has become much, much greener over the last 10 years or so. But what that does mean, of course, is that the proportion of emissions in that 325 million tonnes a year that come from industrial production is now much larger as a proportion. So the Humber accounts for around 5% of the UK's CO2 emissions, just from the Humber industry. Leaving aside domestic residences, leaving aside transport, just from industry in Humber, we generate 5% of all the CO2 produced in this country. That's pretty significant. So what we have to do is we have to find a way of tackling that, but we have to find a way of tackling that that actually maintains the value that we produce in this region. So it'd be very easy to be a bit sheepish about all the CO2 we're producing, but the only reason we're producing all that CO2 from our industries in this region is because people want to buy things. So people still want to buy things, manufacturers, we want to use fuels, we want to have steel for railways. In fact, you could argue, of course, that we will need things like steel in order to help further decarbonise our industry and the way we use energy in this country. So we must find greener ways of manufacturing these sorts of things. So it's really important that we protect these industries and protect the jobs, of course. So 1 in 10 of the jobs in our region is actually founded or come from the sort of industrial emitters that we're talking about here. And ultimately, of course, what we want to do by decarbonising our industry is actually to enhance the environment, enhance the lives, enhance the economy, and to take part in the sort of green growth, the green revolution that we want to see by way of jobs in our region. So let me just do battle with the clicker once more. Thank you. So we're actually one of 6 industrial clusters in the UK. But we're actually the only industrial cluster in the UK that has more than one deployment project. I'll come back to that in a moment. Sorry, more than one onshore deployment project. We're also the only industrial cluster in the UK that has more than one offshore deployment project. So that generates challenges, but it also generates huge opportunities. Deployment projects are the consortia of companies who've come together to decide they want to do something as a group of companies by way of decarbonising. So you can see a couple of them on screen here. We've got Humber Zero and we've got Zero Carbon Humber, 2 onshore deployment projects. They're fantastic cooperations of companies across the Humber region who are working together to work out how they can decarbonise industry. And they're doing that with government support. So that's fantastic. They both help us out enormously on our Humber Industrial Cluster Plan project, so it's a separate project, and they're working with us to help us understand how we can decarbonise Humber industry. We also have offshore deployment projects. You can see one of them there, VNet Zero in gold, and we have something called the Northern Endurance Partnership, which you can see off to the right-hand side of the screen. Those are the places where the CO2 will ultimately be stored underground. The deployment projects, Humber Zero and Zero Carbon Humber, are the ones who will install equipment, they'll build things, they'll do all the clever stuff that means that they will scrub the CO2 out of their emissions, put it into a pipeline and pump it out to the deployment projects offshore, i.e. Northern Endurance Partnership and VNet Zero. But what is the cluster plan? What's it all about? The cluster plan is effectively the glue, the architecture that brings all of this together. So I've said we've got 2 fantastic deployment projects. I pick no favourites, they're both very, very good deployment projects. But as good as they are, or as good as they will be in terms of removing CO2, they will not get the Humber's industry to net zero. We need to do some other things. And that's what the Humber Industrial Cluster Plan is about. First of all, it's about working out how do we optimise some of the things that these deployment projects are doing. You know, can we move a pipeline 500 metres to the south? It picks up an inward economic investment zone. There's a factory located there. All of a sudden, we've got a bit more CO2 coming out of the system. Great. So we can optimise things that are already going on. But the Humber Industrial Cluster Plan, with what we are doing, we're also asking ourselves, what else do we need to do? You know, do we need to look at things like natural methods? Do we need to look at afforestation across our region? Do we need to look at what I call marshification of the Humber to make sure we capture some more CO2? Do we need to do things like direct air capture? if you don't know that, that's where you actually take the CO2 out of the air. Hugely uneconomic, hugely challenging to do at scale at the moment, but that might change. That could change. So what is the extent of the gap? Once our tremendous deployment projects have done their work, what is the gap to get us to net zero? But more than that, not only do we need to work out how we significantly decarbonise by 2030 and get to net zero by 2040, we need to make sure that we do that by protecting the industries. We need to make sure that we protect our economy and the jobs that come with it. We need to work out how we're going to do that by way of supply chain. Where's all the equipment going to come from? Where are all these compressors and new pipeline materials going to come from? And then added to that, of course, who's going to weld all these pipelines together? Who's going to install this stuff? Where are the IE technicians going to come from? Where are the mechanical engineers going to come from? Where are the quantity surveyors who are going to price all this up and run the projects and this kind of thing? Huge range of skills will be needed. We're talking about something like 25 to 35,000 people to make this happen in the Humber. I'll just leave that with you, 25,000 people. And that's just the transition. That's the number of people we will need to make this happen. Everything from, lorry drivers, interesting topical question, right through to IE technicians, engineers, QS, architects, you name it. So we'll need all of those skills for a transition period, and thereafter we will have new jobs created, somewhere around about 3,000 to 5,000, say, new jobs that will be created, enduring jobs about running the equipment, keeping it maintained, and doing all the operational stuff. So these are non-negligible numbers, and we need to work with skilled suppliers in the region, we need to work with SMEs in the region, we need to engage, we need to find out and make sure that they understand the scale of the challenge and they understand when it's coming. That's vitally important. How do we create career opportunities for new people, or indeed young people, or rather, or old people who might want to reskill and do something different and work in this kind of sector? So there's a huge challenge coming up. We're going to deliver this, what I call the roadmap, by March 2023. That will be a sort of document that will outline the things that need to be considered, how we can bring this to life in the Humber, the skills, the supply chain, etc., planning constraints. And this will be offered up to both national government and local authorities as a sort of means of decarbonising the Humber industry. It's obviously up to them whether they choose to adopt all of the kind of recommendations. But it will be founded on something called a systems model. And the reason for using a modelling-based approach is we can model things like direct air capture, carbon capture and storage, conversion from fuels, different types of fuels, hydrocarbon fuels to hydrogen. We can model all of that today, or next year actually. But what happens if things change? So in 2027, we can still have this model and we can actually rerun it again because something's changed, and we can find how our pathway to net zero for Humber industry might have changed. And we can do that a number of times as time goes on. So that's what the Humber Industrial Cluster Plan's about. If you want to ask any more questions, obviously we've got a Q&A session coming up, or feel free to pigeonhole me outside if you see me as well. But I'd be delighted to take any more questions in due course. And thank you for listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, really comprehensive and a great example of we know exactly what we need to do in order to transition, and it's just about getting the willpower and solving these problems in order to do it. So thank you. 25,000 jobs sounds like a massive opportunity. Sorry, the slide was moved on for me. So Adrian Fisher is not who I had down next, but Adrian, come on up. We will we'll do this running order. So yeah, Adrian Fisher, CEO of Rooted in Hull. Thank you very much.
Yeah, hello everybody. Yeah, I see what you mean about the bright light. I think I'm coming at it from a different point of view, very much grassroots. We have, well, I'll try to show you. Yeah, Rooted in Hull. We're an urban farm in the centre of Hull, and we look at things a little bit differently. We're right in the middle of an industrial estate. You can see us, the circular part in the middle. What you see is what you get. We use a site which is meanwhile use. That means we're there because of wedge galvanising, heavy industry, but they had some spare land until they want to develop. And while they do get round to that, we can utilise that. So we look at things totally differently, and we're saying, look, our whole intention is really the knowledge around food and growing, and we've sort of more developed now into the environment and mental health, would you believe? You know, the fact that people can get outside and do something. And it is all about trying to do things and having a way of making things work but adapting. All of our sites use shipping containers, you know, and they're the ones which we buy them, which are called one way. That means they're coming from China, they've been filled with white goods over to the port in Hull, and then we've got the chance to buy them, so it's recycling. And within these containers we work very closely with Hull College, so they're students on work experience. They're managing to do work for us, so they'll do joinery, plumbing, electrical work, training on these containers. They'll do them on the site at Hull College, and then we just pick them up and drop them off. And we've got an office, a workshop, we've got a shop, we've got a kitchen, and we've just put a bakery in now with a wood-fired bread oven. And it's all about how we get people connected back to food, about being together, but looking at things a little bit differently. We never say never. You know, we can always think, yeah, this will work, and we'll adapt and try and make it work. One of the things we've done, because we're on a site, we're not allowed to put any footings in or dig any trenches or anything. So you then may ask, well, how do we do with the waste from the kitchen? And here we go, reed bed. And this is just a simple system with 4 tanks, and that takes the water, the wastewater from the kitchen, goes through sort of a cascade of these 4 tanks, and it's filtered out at the end, and we can reuse that water for watering the plants. And it's such a simple system, but the problem coming from a grassroots side, and this I suppose is all about CO2 as well, is how do you develop this? Because if we'd have looked at that initially, it wasn't really feasible, because we looked at various companies to say, yeah, well, they'll put us a reed bed system in, you know, at starting price £35,000, you know, going up to however much you want for something like this. Now, we work very closely with community, with education and with business, and we're saying, look, there must be other ways of developing this. And so it virtually is on the level of eBay and Google, and saying, yeah, how can we do this? How can we make it work? And it's just the simplicity of using bilge pumps, you know, the little pumps which go into boats, which you can pick up for about 15 quid off eBay. But we're doing that bit to save the planet with this, and it works, you know, it does actually work. We have solar panels, we put those on all the containers, so we are capturing the sunlight, so it's actually working, you know, that is powering what we do on the site. We even harvest the water off the Royal Mail. It's one of the first in the country who has actually managed to work with the Royal Mail. They initially said no, we couldn't harvest their water, and they said, look, you're going to be drilling into our wall and we don't want a mess. And we said, well, if we don't drill into your wall, can we do it then? And they said, oh, all right, I suppose you can. So we had to make a framework which held all the pipes and everything. But it works, you know, 6 mil of rain and we nearly get 6,000 litres of water. And now that system, we have a solar pump which irrigates 80 raised beds. So I could go on all day, but yeah, you know, we even have a composting toilet, and it's one of the few. And yeah, we even had the Lord Mayor come and try it out. Well, maybe not, he sat on it. But the point is, even with that, it's a waterless toilet, and there's a lot of technology. It's a French design. And, you know, it actually works. I can tell you if you want to talk to me later about how it works. But it's, again, how we work at Rooted and how we look at things. And yeah, we can consciously say, we're not calculating our CO2, but we do look at things and say, how can we do things differently? And through the shop, we're selling produce through there. We look at trying to buy things as local as possible. If it's not local, we want a story behind it. So if you're buying a potato through us, we can tell you where that potato was grown or what that farm was, where it was grown on that farm. It's getting this knowledge all about food. Anyway, I could go on a lot longer, as you guessed, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. A really nice little project. I wanted to hear more, so we'll talk to you about that toilet and how it works afterwards. So, Martin Butler, Director of Humber Energy Academy. Martin, if you please come up and tell your story.
Thank you. Oh, it's bright. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Martin Butler. I'm Director of Construction, Build and Environment at DN Colleges Group. This afternoon, I'd just like to... just get the slide up. Okay, I didn't know it was a linked one, sorry. I just want to explain what we're doing in the local community, in Hull and further afield. And it's a bit of a two-part talk really on the DN Colleges Group in the wider remit as well. One of our sites here in Hull, which we've just actually got up to full sort of productivity now, has been funded by the local enterprise partnership, and it's something that we're really proud of, because it's putting back into the community a skill, and I think Jonathan touched on it before, that is needed in the area for the green energy. Now, this has been done in conjunction with Airco and other partners, which you can see up there, Baxi, Ideal, etc. And it is really fulfilling that need to get local kids interested in going into the green energy sector. Now, the wide focus of the group in its entirety is it's really exciting at the moment what the DN Colleges has on offer. The college itself, we've just launched one of our sustainability groups, and it's great to hear what the students have to offer and also what the staff has to offer. And we're taking the ideas and moving it forward and turning that into policy. Now, the important part here is how we've invested wisely in the infrastructure. Just the college campus itself, we just had £1 million investment on a heat pump that powers the whole of the college environment. But we're also taking that further on our other sites. We're looking at actually taking water from the River Don, again, to heat another campus. So it's ideas like that have come from ground level and actually now being implemented across the group. One of the things as well that I'm very proud of is a curriculum intent based around the green agenda. Now, the green agenda is one of those words we've heard now, the green energy sector, the green agenda, etc. But what we're trying to do is to get that message out to schools, that the skills and the future of jobs out there, come to us, come and talk to us. There are many offers. A good example is Siemens Gamesa. We're all familiar with that, and I think we've seen some slides today, what's happening in Hull. We devised a curriculum specifically to meet their need, to get wind turbine technicians. We helped them recruit the students, and our first cohort was 30 students. Now, some of those were from the Hull region, some were wider afield, but it was a really exciting project to get youngsters switched on to the career opportunities that's available now in the UK. And again, it's morphing engineering and construction into one. Green energy has many applications, not just for the sector itself, but also for the wider use. And I think someone touched on electric vehicles and the charging points for electric vehicles, wind turbines, ground source heat pumps, etc, etc. So once we can take those engineers and construction operatives and get them out there into the field, then we are feeding that economic need in the area. Now, one of the other things that we're doing across the whole of the group is building we're building the green energy sector into our general education. So every student that comes to the college, whether they're on sport, whether they're on music or whatever section it is, they get part of the Gatsby framework. Now this is about labour market information, jobs and careers that are available locally, but also linked to environmental awareness and what the college and what the local area is doing. One of these really good forward-looking projects was the Kroll Moors, the peatland, and I think we've mentioned that before, and it's getting kids out there to look at the peatland and see how that has developed and how it's actually a sustainable environment now going forward. The tree planting alone is tremendous, and also reinstating that after years and years of industrial application is fascinating to see. And we've made it fun. So Kroll Moors, we've actually got a little train that actually goes up in a circular movement around Kroll Moors, and it's about introducing that environment and getting youngsters out into that environment that has made it exciting what we're doing. So locally, we have the Humber Energy Skills Training Academy. Now George, my colleague here sat at the front, George is actually the director in charge of that. Although it said it was me at the start, I work across the entire group. But the Energy Skills Training Academy, it's all about Hull, and it's all about getting young people into work, apprenticeships with green energy and carbon capture materials. Heat pump training facility, this is bespoke, it's been funded locally, and now it's delivering the programme. We have over 58 apprentices at this moment that are in the Hull area working on renewable technology. We've invested in staff. Of course, these are new skills, so we haven't got training staff that can actually go straight out there and actually deliver heat pump training. But working with partners and working with awarding bodies to develop curriculum as we go, we're now actually hitting, manufacturers, we're now hitting our stride in being able to offer a robust programme that hopefully will deliver over the next years. We've also seen a threefold increase in apprenticeships and refrigeration, air conditioning, heat pump standard. And as I mentioned before, that coming into the green energy sector, actually you can go into other sectors as well. Refrigeration, you know, a heat pump works by compressing if it's ground source liquid, if it's not, it's air, and creating heat out of it. And again, it's getting that across to school kids. I go into schools to do lots of talks, and if we're selling old-fashioned ideologies like fitting, machining, welding, etc., school kids think, I want a career, I want to go forward. So if I'm stood talking to students, I'm saying about mechatronics and where mechatronics can take you, and refrigeration and the future tech makes it exciting. So it's a feeder. What we're offering at the Energy Skills Training Academy is a feeder system where you can either come full-time, get into that, or you can attain an apprenticeship and actually work in the local community taking this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I think that was one of the first times I've seen, you know, a challenge being presented from Jonathan of 25,000 jobs needed, and then Martin presenting the solution of how within the local region you're actively training people to fill those jobs. That is really cool, and we need to capture that as a collective story as well, because that is something we should be rolling out. So, thank you. Right, David Hall, owner of Beverley Park Homes. If you wouldn't mind coming up and sharing your story, please, David. Thank you very much.
Hello there, my name's David Hall. I'm the owner of Beverley Park Homes and Minster Leisure Homes. There's been a lot of larger organisations represented here today. I'm very much here to fly the flag for the SMEs, the manufacturers, the start-ups, the small companies in particular. And that's more or less the point of view I'll be coming at this from today. What we have done. I'd like to talk a little bit about what we've done at ours. They are baby steps, but as I say, we are an SME. In-house manufacture, that's a massive part for what we do. We manufacture nearly everything in-house. We manufacture our own, we make holiday homes, by the way, to clarify that. We make our own skating boards, we make our own architraves, we make our own door casings, we make our own structural beams, we make our own roof trusses, we make our own kitchens. This is a mindset for what we do. Everything that we do, everything that we produce, we look at it and think, why can't we make this? Rather than buying it from somebody or shipping it in from somewhere else, let's make it ourselves. We've got the staff, we've got the know-how, let's build it ourselves. Also, supplier engagement. Again, this has been touched on a few times today, but I wanted to give you the sort of the little guy's experience of that. And it can be just something as simple as, where's this product coming from? Is there something else that we can use that's closer? It could be something along the lines of, is it sourced locally? Is it an alternative to this? I mean, we'll sit with our suppliers and say, well, we're using this board or this timber. Is this the best thing for the environment? Is there a similar alternative that we can use that's a little bit greener? Waste management, again, touched on earlier by Lloyd Atkin from Bio, do very well. And that's just the simplicity of asking the questions. Waste's a big expense to most companies, and it's a case that it can be as simple as just walking past the bin, opening it and saying, oh, what can we do with this? You know, cardboard's a good example. A lot of people throw cardboard away. You can get paid for that. It's a lot easier to work with through that, and it will help the bottom line. I've made a couple of more notes on the waste management. Yeah, just as an example of what we've done with our waste, one of the offcuts we use, say we build a wall, and in that wall is a window opening. Well, across that window opening will be a board, which will get cut out and normally go into waste. Now, we've put processes in place to be able to say, we can use this in other parts of our manufacture. We use the hole that we cut out of our window, actually makes the gang plates on our roof trusses. And that doesn't benefit us from a getting rid of waste point of view. It benefits the whole factory. No one's getting rid of it. It gets patterned. It goes into a different area and becomes usable again in the business. We look at all of our waste like that. I've got the other company, Minster Leisure Homes. We build a fairly similar product, but we send our waste down to Minster, and Minster send their waste up to us. So it's only a case of asking the question at each point, is this actually waste, or is this opportunity for another part of the business to actually use this and stop buying it from somewhere else? Prioritise local staff. Bit of a mistake this, because it doesn't really need the staff at the end. It's just prioritise local. Do you know, it started off as a staff thought, because when we recruit staff, we start from the factory and work outwards. And we want someone coming, we've got a factory in Beverley and a factory in Ticton. So we want people from Ticton to work at the Ticton site. We don't need people coming from Scunthorpe driving all the way through. When we can just chat to people in Ticton, there must be something. And when I say prioritise local, well, that's across everything we do. We don't need to purchase timber from the other side of the planet when it can come from around the corner. And it's the same from sales as well. Why supply a lodge to someone in Cornwall when we can supply one to Brid? Probably not the best example, but it's a case of it's always better to be local. So how can we prioritise them local decisions? Also, oh, there we go. Environmental impacts always taken into account. Now that can be, it sort of goes without saying really here, but when we're sat in a discussion, and this could be about absolutely anything within the business, it's just having someone there to say, are we taking into consideration the environment on this? Do you know, have we got an A and B choice? And if there is, can we tip that with a green question, with the methodology that comes into our green way of thinking? Is there a better way or a more environmental friendly way of doing whatever we're talking about? It's something that always needs to come up within conversation. Most of these points that I've made fall under a different description, and that would be the description where it's going to be very difficult to get SME businesses to really buy into this, because as an SME owner, I know that I've got my blinkers on. I'm just sat there concentrating on solely surviving as a business, and it's very difficult. It's going to be a very difficult sell to SMEs and manufacturers to really prioritise this running through. And I think the way it's described and the way it's sold to SMEs is really, really important. And as I say, all of what we spoke about had the same thing in common. And really, the question that I'd like to ask in that respect would be, so it's businesses know that it's beneficial to them, is that can green be the new lean? Everything that we spoke about would have come up in a lean discussion. And I think when, from an outsider trying to explain that from me, I know that lean means money. It means efficiencies, it means more on my bottom line, and the green can be exactly the same as that. You know, it doesn't have to be a cost to a business. If you speak to small business owners about this, they're going to think, well, that sounds a bit costly. I don't know about this. But if it's sold in the correct way, if it's shown that, because you have the same discussion with that business owner and say, I'll give you someone to come in and assess your business to see how lean you are, and we're going to give you a few pointers. They will snap your hand off because it means money to them. Whereas if they come in and say, we want to come in and assess your green, they just think, oh, that's going to be costly. Well, 9 times out of 10, from the points that I made before, they are exactly the same thing in many respects. That's that one and that one. How do we roll this out? The first point being bespoke support. Most businesses are very different in what they do and how they do it. So any support that's going to be given needs to be, it can't be generic. It can't be, well, do a bit more of this, do a bit more of that. It has to be tailored to that specific company, going in and saying, what are you doing? What are you using it? Where are you buying it from? Where's it going? And every business is different, so that really needs to be looked at properly to say, how can we tailor that support to the business that's required? Incentives. These don't have to be monetary based, but it always helps if they are. And also in the incentives, to be able to really say, the incentives can be stronger in that respect. So if someone comes in and says, I'm looking at buying some new vans, I need a grant to do so. Well, realistically, the grant should be pushed more towards electric vehicles, for argument's sake. We shouldn't be in a position now where someone goes and gets a grant for a diesel van. These are really quick wins that we can say, right, if you're going to get a grant, we need you to go down this route. And it can be stipulated as part of it. These are the stronger, more direct incentives that we can maybe look at. Expand on local initiatives. I know that Hull City Council have something now where they go into businesses. I don't know much about this, but they go into businesses and they will look at that business. They will look at the insulation the offices are done in, they'll look at the processes from a manufacturing point of view. This is excellent. This is exactly what SMEs need. They need somebody to come in and hold the hand and say, look, it's not scary, it's not expensive. Look at what you're doing and say, right, we can really tailor this to you. So there's some really good initiatives out there, and they probably just need expanding on. It'd be nice to see East Riding Council getting involved in that as well. Early adoption and culture driven. This is really, ideally, the green methodology would be in the business plans of every startup, and the moving forward of businesses. Even if I did a year's business plan the other day, it should be ingrained in the culture of a business to really make sure that at each point that it's there as a question, and not just from a manager's point of view, but if we ask someone to do something on the shop floor, then I want that thrown back in my face to say, that's not very green, Dave. You know, if we can embed that in our culture, whether it be our mission statement, our vision and values, it's really important, I believe, for SMEs to have some type of tip of the cap to the green methodology, which what we refer to it as in there. And finally, immediate actions. I think we should all go out and buy a lodge and embark on our own staycation. I mean, apart from the obvious bit of buying a lodge is the staycation. I feel a bit embarrassed saying this, but COVID's been very good for us in this respect, you know, and for the planet. We've seen the massive boom in staycations, and for the people that realistically would have gone on maybe 3, maybe even 4 holidays abroad a year, we've seen this huge boom in, do you know what, we'll cut this down to 1, we'll maybe go away sometime when it's a little bit colder here, and they're really spending the money on the local staycations, the parks, whether it be Cornwall or Brid, and yeah, I think it's something that naturally the business that I'm involved in helps on that front. We've seen a big impact from a few years ago where caravans were caravans and they were a coal tin sat on a cliff top somewhere. Now what we make is equal or better than where people live, and that really drives a staycation boom. It's luxurious to go away and stay in a lodge. It's not an upgraded tent. These are walk-in, you've got dog showers and walk-in wardrobes, and we really push the boundaries to make sure that staycations can be really popular in the future. So obviously we are having questions at the end, and I'd love to hear any questions, so thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you, David. Another really powerful story, and yeah, SMEs, we have to make this thing profitable, otherwise we're never going to see the change we need to take place. A fun one to phrase, or a man of many phrases, is where there's carbon, there's cost, and I'll throw another one in for good measure. You can't manage what you don't measure. So if you can measure and reduce energy, especially with the rising energy price, you're going to reduce your costs. And then easy and profitable are two really key phrases, especially for SMEs, in order to drive the change and incentivize them to do the same. So yeah, I might steal that. Can green be the new lean phrase? Yeah, thank you, and a great direct plug as well. Before closing remarks, we actually have some time for questions. And do we have any questions? It's going to be challenging for me to see. Oh, that's better. If we have any questions, does anyone have a question? Gentleman at the front, if you just wait for 2 seconds, we'll get you a mic so everyone can hear you. Thank you, Liz.
Yeah, mine was for Jonathan. You mentioned, I think you called it Marxism. I just wondered if you could explain that a little bit further.
Yeah, certainly. So this is my own terminology here. So marshification, I think I referred to it. So that might mean things like considering the sort of reaches and edges of the Humber estuary, and what you might do there that would help that be more of a carbon sink rather than a source of carbon. So I guess it was just another means of naturally removing the CO2 from the atmosphere was what I was referring to there.
Thank you. Gentleman there.
Hi, John Johnston from a company called iHelios. It's a question for Martin, actually. You mentioned obviously a variety of different training programs for the young students that are coming through. And whenever I sort of see those sorts of organisations, the training actually seems quite narrow. There's an awful lot of different technologies that are actually coming through the market, but it seems to be always the historic or the air source heat pumps and what have you. What's the plans for actually developing other training for other technology groups that are coming through? I have a particular interest in that, by the way. But, yeah.
We're always working with employers to develop, a broad spectrum. I use the example of what we did with Siemens Gamesa. They wanted something that was bespoke to their organisation, that delivered training for their business. And I would welcome a chance, to explore really your in detail what you're proposing there and what you want as a requirement. We are very flexible as a group. Because we are a college group, we have many talented people throughout the different sites. And therefore, from a resource point of view, hopefully we've got a package, or we can tailor a package to your needs. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks for your words as well. And does the director of the academy, is he prepared to come into the whole college and speak with us about how we could possibly integrate so that we become incorporated into what it is you're doing, so that we can help meet the demand for this industry that's going forward?
Sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
No, it's okay. Would you be able to work with us as another college in this city to further expand what it is you're doing as an academy?
I'd be always willing to talk to you, and if we have got some common ground, some common strategy, then definitely.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Awesome. I've got one. Adrian, we might have missed it, but where where do your products that you grow go? Do you sell them? Do they're sold into the local community? What's the model there?
Sorry, where do we grow?
Once you've grown the fruit and vegetables that are on the farm, where do they end up? What are the routes to market and things like that?
It's interesting because we have something like 80 raised beds, and if you take a raised bed, it's 2.4 by 1.2. So we're not doing really enough to sell, but what we do, it goes through into the kitchen, and we've got quite a name for doing soup. So we get all these sort of specialities, even beetroot soup. But it's a way, it's like an exhibition area. It's something what people can think, oh hell, I can do this at home, can't I? And you think, yeah, of course you can. You know, it's just with a little bit of thinking. And we do quite a bit with herbs, and we work with some of the chefs in Hull as well, because we've had maybe over 50 different varieties of herbs, and they do improve your cooking such a lot, and it can make a dramatic difference. And even somebody on the poverty level where they're really struggling, you know, do some pasta, but get some herbs in there and a little bit of spice, and it makes it all together more exciting, you know, and that's again what we're about. So there's nothing ever wasted. It's all utilised, and if in some terms we can even, you know, get out of veg box and go to a family who are struggling, and we'll do that as well.
That's really cool.
And for that end, I mean, we got an electric bike, you know, cargo bike. I mean, that was sort of mentioned today, and you know that it's great. You know, get around town, we can be at least double less half the time of what you can in a car or a van. So yeah, it's all those sort of elements.
Thank you, Adrian. Do we have any questions from the live stream at all, Bridie? No. What a shame. We have a gentleman at the front, yeah.
Hi, afternoon. My name's Paul Hardy. I run a company called Oxygen. We're based locally, and we provide water-saving systems for commercial buildings. So I just wanted to sort of put the supplier perspective spin on this, really. Obviously, we've got SMEs and local authorities and partnerships here. One of the difficulties we find in providing these sorts of services into companies is that actually the SMEs are very, very forward-thinking, and they're very willing to take things on board and try new things, and they can make very swift decisions and get these systems in operation very quickly. What we're finding is actually the bigger the beast, the local authorities, the bigger partnerships, it fundamentally slows down to almost a halt. So everybody's talking this up and saying we want to get everything, we'd love to lower our carbon footprint, but actually when it comes to actually getting things off the ground, it's very, very difficult for a local company that provides these sorts of services to deal with the bigger entities. And it would just be nice to see these authorities or entities be a little bit more forward-thinking in terms of fast-tracking these decision-makings to skew towards carbon neutral. So just really a comment, really, rather than a question.
Thank you. No, that's a really important comment. Does anyone want to speak to that? Possibly not. Well done. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting perspective, actually, and I think, it's something I recognise having worked in larger corporations and in smaller outfits, and you need to be quite attuned. I think the challenge we're talking about really here is about individual perceptions and attitudes, and whether those individuals happen to work in an SME environment, or whether they happen to work in a global corporation, or whether they happen to work in a local authority or a local enterprise partnership, or whether they happen to just be an individual at home. I think what we're talking about here is a recognition that we all need to start looking and acting and thinking differently about some of these things, and being willing to change our mindsets. So we're all in the habit of sort of wanting to walk into the house and flick our switch, and you can instantly have lights, or you can instantly charge your mobile phone device up, your mobile phone that's got precious metals or rare earth metals rather, and it's got plastics in, and yet we're all very happy, or lots of us are happy to say, plastics, boo, that's not a good thing, we should do without them.